The wind was dry and warm across the Arizona desert that evening, carrying the faint smell of smoke from a campfire somewhere far away. John Miller, a 35-year-old rancher, was riding home after a long day of searching for a missing calf. His horse Dusty moved slowly, tired from the miles of rough land. The sun had almost disappeared behind the red cliffs, and long shadows stretched over the canyon floor. As John crossed the shallow creek, he heard something strange, a soft sound, almost like a cry. At first he thought it was just the wind, but then it came again, faint but human. He stopped the horse, listening carefully. It was coming from behind a cluster of rocks near the old trail that led toward the Apache lands. John dismounted and slowly approached, his boots crunching the dry soil. When he rounded the rocks, he froze. A young Apache woman lay on the ground, her arm covered in blood and her leg twisted under her. She looked weak, as if she had been there for hours. Her dark hair was tangled and her face was pale with exhaustion. For a moment, neither of them spoke. John had seen Apache people before, but never like this. Alone, injured, far from her tribe. He could see fear in her eyes as she tried to push herself back. "It's all right," John said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt you." She looked at him suspiciously, breathing hard. "White man," she whispered, her voice dry and faint. "Go away," John shook his head. "You're hurt. If I leave you here, you won't make it through the night." She tried to speak again, but winced in pain. Her strength was fading. Without waiting for her permission, John knelt down and checked her leg. It was swollen and bleeding from a deep cut. He quickly tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped it around the wound to stop the bleeding. "You need water," he said, pulling his canteen from the saddle. He helped her take a few slow sips. She hesitated at first, but thirst won over fear. After a few minutes, her breathing steadied a little. "My name is John," he said gently. "I'll take you somewhere safe." She looked at him, her eyes softening just a little. "Nita," she murmured. "My name, Nita," John nodded. "All right, Nita, let's get you out of here." He carefully lifted her onto his horse, holding her steady as they rode toward his ranch. The night grew cold and the stars filled the sky. Nita didn't speak much, but she leaned against him, too weak to sit straight. He could feel how light she was, how fragile, yet there was a quiet strength in her grip on the saddle. When they finally reached the ranch, John carried her inside. His old dog Max barked once and then went silent, sensing something serious. John cleaned Nita's wounds as best he could and wrapped her leg tightly. He gave her a blanket and set a small fire in the hearth. For the first few nights, she barely spoke. She watched him silently as he worked, cooked, and cared for his animals. John didn't push her to talk. He just made sure she had food and water and rest. Slowly, her color returned, and her leg began to heal. One morning, as he was pouring her some coffee, Nita finally spoke more than a few words. "Why you help me?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the mug. John looked surprised. "Because you needed help. Anyone would have done the same." She shook her head. "No, white men. They fear my people. They see Apache, they turn away." John sighed and sat across from her. "Not all men are the same. My father taught me that every life matters, no matter who you are." Nita studied him quietly, as if trying to understand what kind of man he was. Then she said softly, "You saved me. That means something." Days passed, and the ranch began to feel different. Nita helped when she could, feeding the chickens, folding laundry, even brushing Dusty when her leg was strong enough. She laughed quietly the first time the horse tried to steal hay from her hand. It was the first time John had heard her laugh, and it warmed something inside him that had been cold for years. They began to talk more. She told him little things about her tribe, how they believed the wind carried messages from their ancestors, how every creature had a spirit, how fire was sacred because it gave life and warmth. John listened, fascinated. He told her about his late wife who had died years ago during a fever and how he had buried himself in work since then. Nita listened without judgment, only silence and understanding. One evening, as the orange glow of sunset filled the room, Nita stood by the window, looking out at the land. Her leg had almost healed. "I must return to my people soon," she said quietly. John felt a strange emptiness at those words. He nodded slowly. "I understand." She turned to him, her dark eyes serious. "When I return, they will ask who saved me. I must tell them the truth. And there is a law among my people. John frowned slightly. A law? She nodded. A sacred law. If a man saves the life of a woman, he becomes part of her spirit. She must repay that life by giving one of her own. He didn't understand at first. What do you mean? Her voice was calm but firm. You saved me, John Miller. So now, according to the sacred law, I must bear you a child. John froze. The words hung in the air like the stillness before a storm. He tried to speak but couldn't. Nita's face was serious but not embarrassed. To her, it wasn't strange. It was honor, gratitude, and tradition. Finally, John found his voice. Nita, I didn't help you for that. You don't owe me anything. She looked at him with quiet strength. Among my people, life is not a debt. It is balance. You gave me life. I give life in return. That is our way. He stood in silence, watching the fire crackle. Part of him wanted to protest, to tell her she was free to go and live her life as she wished. But another part, deep inside, felt something different. A pull. A connection that had grown quietly between them through nights of care, laughter, and shared pain. The room was quiet except for the wind outside. Nita stepped closer, her eyes soft but unwavering. Do not refuse what the Great Spirit has chosen, she said gently. You are part of my story now. John looked at her, torn between reason and emotion. He saw the courage in her eyes, the depth of her belief, and something pure that he couldn't name. That night he sat by the fire long after she had gone to rest, staring into the flames. He thought about fate, about choices, and about how sometimes life gives you what you never knew you needed. Outside, the wind carried the sound of coyotes and the rustle of the desert grass. Inside, the ranch felt warm for the first time in years, not because of the fire, but because of something else. Something alive. The next morning came with a quiet sunrise. A pale orange light touched the hills around the ranch, and the world seemed peaceful. John was already awake, fixing the fence by the pasture when he saw Nita step outside. Her leg was better now. She could walk without pain. She looked calm, but her eyes held something heavy, something that made John's chest tighten a little. I must go home today, she said softly. Her voice was steady, but her eyes lowered almost shyly. John stopped what he was doing. You're sure you're ready? Yes, she said. My people will be searching for me. I cannot stay away too long, he nodded. He knew she was right. Yet the thought of her leaving felt like the wind had suddenly turned cold. He had gotten used to her quiet presence, the way she moved around the house, her soft laughter when Dusty tried to nudge her for apples, the peace she brought into his lonely life. Before she left, Nita walked into the small cabin and picked up a piece of leather. She used a sharp stone to draw something on it, a circle with 3 small lines crossing the middle. Then she handed it to him. This is for you, she said. It means the path of 2 spirits crossing. It will guide you when the time is right. John took it, his fingers brushing hers. I'll keep it safe. She smiled gently, then climbed onto Dusty, who snorted softly as if understanding. John walked beside them until they reached the ridge overlooking the desert. The wind was strong there, carrying dust and sunlight together. I will tell them the truth, she said quietly, and I will wait for you to come. John didn't know what to say. She turned and rode away slowly, her figure growing smaller until it disappeared beyond the rocks. He stood there for a long time, holding the leather charm tightly in his hand. Days passed. The ranch felt empty again. John worked hard to keep his mind busy, but every sunset reminded him of her. He would find himself looking toward the horizon, hoping to see a rider coming from the west. But none came. Then, about 2 weeks later, while he was fixing the barn roof, he saw a group of riders approaching from the distance. His heart jumped, thinking it might be her. But as they got closer, he realized it was not Nita. These were Apache men, proud and silent, riding with purpose. John climbed down slowly, careful not to make any move that might seem threatening. The leader, an older man with gray braids and sharp eyes, stopped his horse a few yards away. Behind him rode several younger warriors, each watching John closely. Are you the man called Miller? The elder asked. John nodded. Yes, sir. The old man's gaze was steady but not angry. You found Nita, daughter of our people? I did, John said. She was hurt. I brought her here, cared for her until she could walk again. She's safe. The elder's face softened slightly. She returned home. She spoke of your kindness, of how you gave without asking. John relaxed a little, but the old man continued. Our law is old and sacred. The woman you saved has given her word. She says the spirits have bound your lives together. She is waiting for you to come to our camp. John was silent for a moment. He had not expected this. Part of him wanted to go immediately. Another part was unsure if he would be welcome. Your people, would they accept me? He asked quietly. The elder studied him for a long moment. A man's color is not what the Great Spirit sees, only his heart. If you come in peace, you will be received in peace. With that, the Apache men turned their horses and rode off toward the canyon. John stood there watching them disappear into the distance, the wind whipping through his shirt. He looked down at the small leather charm in his hand and knew what he had to do. That evening, as the sun set, he packed a small bag, saddled Dusty, and began the long ride toward the Apache lands. The trail was quiet except for the sound of hooves and the cry of distant hawks. By the time he reached their village, the stars were already bright above the desert. Torches flickered along the edge of the camp. As he approached, several guards stopped him, but when he showed the charm, they nodded and led him to the center where the elder waited. Nita was there too. She stood near the fire, her face glowing in the orange light. When she saw him, her eyes widened in surprise and something like relief. She stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly. You came, she whispered. John nodded. I said I'd keep my word. The elder raised his hand, calling the people together. They gathered around the fire, quiet and curious. He spoke in their language for a while, his voice calm and deep, then turned to John. Our daughter owes her life to this man. By the law of the ancestors, their spirits are joined. John looked at Nita, unsure what to say. He didn't fully understand their customs, but he could feel the seriousness in the air. Nita stepped closer, her eyes fixed on him. You do not have to accept if your heart does not wish it, she said softly. But know that I already see you as part of my story. John hesitated for only a moment. Then he spoke with quiet honesty. When I found you, I didn't think it would lead to this. But since that day, I haven't stopped thinking about you. Maybe this is where I'm meant to be. A soft murmur moved through the gathered people. The elder smiled, a small, knowing smile. Then let the spirits bless this union, he said. That night, under the wide sky full of stars, the Apache people sang a quiet song around the fire. Nita sat beside John, and for the first time he felt truly at peace. There was no boundary between their worlds anymore, only the steady rhythm of hearts that had chosen to trust each other. In the weeks that followed, John began to learn their ways. He helped build shelters, hunted with the men, and learned to ride their horses bareback. Nita taught him words from her language, laughing when he mispronounced them. The tribe slowly accepted him, seeing his sincerity and hard work. One morning, Nita brought him to the edge of the river. She handed him a small carved stone in the shape of a bird. This is the spirit of flight, she said. It means new beginnings. You have given me life, and now I give you a new one. John smiled, touched by her words. You already did, Nita, he said quietly. The day you walked into my life, everything changed. Time passed, and the desert seasons turned. John's old ranch still stood, but he visited it less often. He had found something he never expected, belonging. The people who had once been strangers were now family. The woman he had once rescued had become his reason to live. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold, Nita sat beside him near the fire. She placed his hand on her heart and whispered, The Great Spirit smiles on us. The circle is complete. John didn't speak. He just looked at her, feeling gratitude deeper than words. Somewhere in the distance, an eagle cried, and the wind carried its echo across the wide land. For a long time, they sat together in silence, watching the stars appear one by one. Two souls from different worlds, bound not by law or fear, but by something older, something sacred and true. And when the night grew cold, John looked into the fire and thought of the first time he had found her on the desert ground, broken and afraid. Now she was whole again, strong and proud, and in her eyes he saw the same fire that had once gone out in his own heart. He realized then that sometimes fate doesn't come with thunder or signs. It comes quietly, in the form of a stranger who changes everything. And as the wind whispered through the canyon, John smiled to himself. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this. The woman he had saved him too.